So here we are with two phenomenal guests. This is the first time that Charles Kramer has been a guest of ours, and he is counsel for Republic Title and has also had the privilege of being on the broker lawyer committee for the past 12 years. And I think you said co-chair for half of that. Is that correct, Charles?
Yep.
So you might know Awesome. So you obviously know a thing or two. So we're going to put your knowledge to the test today. And then our phenomenal returning guest, Adrienne Kirby with Gateway Mortgage. She is a fantastic lender, super knowledgeable, fellow TRLP graduate, and just so pleased that both of you guys could join us this evening. So I think we can all agree, wrapping up this year, that there's been an interesting marketplace, but also some interesting caveats that have started to trend out of that. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight is, I think we named it contractual confrontations, or should they be? So let's start off with, I think, the thing that has become the trendiest or almost a standard of practice in this marketplace. And it's the fantastic appraisal waiver, as we call it in short. That is not its full name. But Charles, let's start with you. What was the being on the broker lawyer committee and being a part of those discussions? What was the idea or the nature behind this quote unquote appraisal waiver?
Attorneys are very hesitant they really don't want brokers drafting their own language. They want to give everybody, and the idea of the broker lawyer committee is to give everybody the same forms and everybody's operating from the same place. But when market forces operate to drive agents to private attorneys, such as we've had in the last, I'd say 5 years at least, with the low inventory and the heavy buyer demand, the concept of paying over list price or just trying to blow other offers out of the water created this concept where agents said, you know what, if it doesn't appraise, I want you to buy it anyway. So I want you to dump in more cash and lower your loan amount, change your loan to value ratio to force you to buy it anyway. If you're going to commit to that price, I want to nail you down to that. And so agents were drafting clauses all over the book on that. And finally, the broker lawyer committee, and really Trek is who put it to us. Trek said, we don't want agents drafting these clauses. Some are well drafted, some are not. We need to give them a uniform set of rules and clauses to operate by. So the appraisal addendum came out with 3 boxes to allow sellers primarily to deal with this issue. Now, one of the most important things I want to point out is that third box,
the third box,
the third choice, whatever that is not really for this issue of overappraisal. That is, box 1 and box 2 are sisters, and they're related to each other. And box 3 is really intended to replace the language we used to see in special provisions when you had very high equity, where the lender might indeed approve a loan and it still doesn't appraise. And the agent was trying to write something like the property must appraise for the sales price. And so you use that third box to basically say, no matter what other rights I have to get out of this deal, that property has to appraise for at least X, which is probably going to be the sales price. And if it doesn't, then I get the independent right to terminate and get out of the deal. That's box 3. That's, typically appraised for sales price. Box 1 and 2 are the ones that people are using. And I'd say the biggest problem or obstacle I see is not understanding the difference between box 1 and box 2, the two sisters. Box 1 is unlimited. Box 1 basically says, all right, I'm buying this house for $500,000. If it appraises for $2, I will pay whatever cash is necessary and lower there's no limit to the amount of cash that you have to pump in and lower your loan amount. It's a big one. Some people are not that worried about under appraisal, and so they take their chances. But I have seen instances where agents don't realize that box 1 is a no limits commitment. And box 2 does, in fact, have some sort of cap. It's got to appraise for at least this, or else I can get out. And that's the biggest problem I see.
Well, and so then I'm gonna punt to Adrian just here in a second. And again, Adrian knows about this about me, Charles. I told you this is not just about being politically correct and kind of tiptoeing around these things. Really, a lot of it is the education of the agents, because this has been around. I mean, this form has been around. I think now, yeah, it's been at least 3, maybe 4 years that this form came out. I think the 2021 has become like 6 months if you think about it mentally, but it has been that long. And we still have agents that have been practicing during that time period that still actually don't understand how to appropriately check the box. And then from that goes, when you're checking that box, you might be talking to your client, the consumer, the buyer, but the other important person to consult is the lender. And I think that's what a lot of agents are not doing prior to doing that, because they're exhausted, they're fatigued. The buyer just says, get me in a house, fine, I'll sign it, or just sends it electronically to sign and doesn't even explain what they're signing. And then lo and behold, Adrian gets the contract and wow, it wasn't even checkmate. They don't have additional reserves. They have just enough to cover closing costs and the initial down payment. So Adrian, what are some things I know you're really good. You're a good lender who's been in this marketplace for a very long time. You have fantastic relationships with your agent partners, but any horror stories, any things that you're seeing, whether it's with you or other lender partners that are struggling with this appraisal waiver?
I've seen some of the realtors struggling with which box to check and calling me and asking me, yeah, well, which box do we check? I'm like, well, have you talked to your client, and here's how much money they have, and are they willing to pay over? I haven't had any issues, because most of the realtors and the agents that I work with, they actually call me prior to, and we discuss it. I've had 1 or 2 come across with realtors I've not worked for before, and they have done that first box. And I've had to call them and say, they don't have any money and you're still an option. You better do something. You got to get out of the contract or do something, because they're going to lose their money if not. There's no way you can do a partial up to this amount, if you want, but you can't. They just can't do it if it comes in low, And most of them are they'll say, well, I've done my research and I pulled some comps. I think we're going to be good. And I'm like, well, you've got to be positive. So we've had 2 that they've gotten out of the contract for that reason.
And that's really hard right now, because what we're seeing is the market is moving faster than the comps are getting reported. And that's the hard part. Yes, it might be able to be justifiable to an extent when 123 Maple Street is pending at this and XYZ Street is pending at this. But appraisers can't use pendings. Yes, if you want to provide some of that data to them, they'll take that into consideration, that this is what's trending in the area and this is what's going on. But it's still database, and until it's not configured that way, that's what we have to work around. I just had a listing in Allen. It was listed at $494,000, and I got $632. And there was nothing special. I work really hard. I do all my staging. We have a lot of pre-listing homework. I mean, the house was as ready as it was, the nicest one on the market when we were done with it, but there was no wow factor. I mean, it was a beautiful home and everything else, but it was a $500,000 house. In a smaller executive community. And so, all of the offers were there. And then the one gentleman who had made an initial offer just said, my client doesn't want to lose this one. They're willing to go for the gusto, and came back and offered $632. And I had the conversation multiple times. And the client was owned a loan company. So there was no excuse of understanding and the implications. And I said, I will just tell you, I don't see this appraising even close to that. Oh. It appraised exactly what I thought it was going to, for $550, even though there was another comp that could have supported higher, that the appraiser missed. But beyond that, wasn't willing to adjust. And they had to bring $90,000 or $80-something thousand extra to the table.
Something to keep in mind is that when you have one offer, if you got multiple offers and you have one that's just so far out there, above and beyond the others, that at first glance seems great, but you do need to talk to your client about whether it's illusory. Is this just a mirage? Because you can tie them down legally and say you have to bring an unlimited amount of cash, but if they don't have it, you kind of set yourself up for failure. There's no point in doing that.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I will tell you, very often we do not take the top offer. And in fact, we were actually, my client and I, after giving him all of the points, here's what can happen at this stage, here's what can happen at this stage. And any agent thinks that they are safe with this, addendum being signed. It is just a freaking piece of paper,
right.
Just like the rest of the contract. And immediately when the numbers become real, somebody can say, sue me, which is more hassle than it's worth when you're trying to actively sell your house. So we were actually pursuing an offer that was 600, and we had 3 or 4 that were in that cluster. And unfortunately, the agent didn't play it right and gave us misgivings that they were even willing to sign a partial waiver at some point. And so he said, well, if we're going to have that kind of atmosphere, should we at least not try for this? And the guy, and that's how he sold it. He owns the company. He owns the lending institution. And I said, okay, well then this is how we're going to go. And ultimately they asked us to reduce. And I said, it's a real hard argument when he is the lender. And he said, you're absolutely right. And they closed the next day. So that is the exception to the rule, because you're absolutely right, Charles, from that standpoint. If somebody's shooting the moon, they're doing just that, and they will try to claw it back during that. Right. So maybe talk about that just a little bit, because Adrian, were you going to say something?
I was. So I had one client realtor that they wanted to get into a house. So they were making like 10 offers in a weekend and offering just unlimited stuff, and then deciding after they were accepted which one was going to stick. And then
you'll get a reputation real fast. Agents, brokers talk, they know each other. That's not cool to do. And while you might legally use your option to gamble and put out 10 offers, word will get out on the street really fast that you're a player and you play games with folks. And if you're only going to do 1 out of 10 deals and kill the rest, your name and your reputation are too important to be associated with that kind of conduct, I think.
For sure. And I told my client, I said, you're asking all these people to accept your offer. Then they're going to take it off the market. You're going to decide after the fact. I said, who's that fair to?
Well, and that goes both ways. And this market has definitely bred some unsavory tactics because people are desperate and fatigued and everything else. And that's why we still have to, hold our head up, and we still have to be professional at the end of the day. It is hard though when you can't get traction. As an agent that actively lists homes and represents buyers, I go into that setting that expectation in my buyer consultations, over the phone, and just saying, hey, yeah, it's an aggressive marketplace, but I don't have anybody, not in a house at this juncture, but we have to be prepared. Sometimes we'll have tactical advantage because a professional wants to work with another professional, and I can work that way. I've won several offers over this past year where we weren't even close to the top, but they knew we would get to the finish line together, and that's what they were looking for, was assurances.
There are other ways to make your offer stand out besides the top end sales price. And so the phrase that you hear is no 2 offers are exactly alike. And that is so true, because if you have a really popular hot house and you get gobs and gobs of offers, they're all going to kind of reach a same sort of, max point. And that's when the listing agent and the seller can say, all right, so they're all basically hitting around 500,000, a few pennies more here and there. How about option fee? How about earnest money? In fact, that's perhaps the most overlooked thing we have this tradition in Texas of what I call pathetic earnest money contracts, where people are still writing contracts with $500 earnest money, $1,500 earnest money, $2,500 earnest money. And yes, $2,500 is a lot, but not when it comes to $1 million home or an $800.
No.
So if you can procure for your seller earnest money that's 5 figures, 10,000, 15,000, 25, 35, $50,000, it changes the conduct of the buyer. They have so much more skin in the game that they act differently, and they're not nearly as cavalier about walking away from the deal as they are when they got $2,500.
Well, and that was part of it. That's a good topic. I got both the option fee and the earnest money up on that shooting the moon contract. So by the end of it, they were in about $20,000.
Yeah.
And so regardless if they were, we were going to see that check, which is also what I told my seller. It has to be a mutually signed release of earnest money. So while you might not see that check, they won't either. Yeah. And it does make them more invested in the transaction. And so when you are looking at it that way, and they were $20,000 invested between option, earnest, and due diligence, that is a different game. And as agents, we have to be more tactical when we're looking at those things. Just purely writing, filling out the contract appropriately. I will tell you, in situations where I have 20 offers, I might have one that's appropriately filled out. And that's rough, because we have all of this education at our fingertips. We have all these great referral partners that offer education, and it's right there. But I heard the statistic the other day, which I know is not a major anomaly, but it still is for me, that 50% of Texas realtors right now have been licensed for less than 5 years. And when you're talking about that, while that might be kind of consistent, when you're talking 160,000 realtors, 175, I can't remember the name or the number of that, that's a lot. When we have that many realtors now in the state. I mean, our association alone has grown several thousand members this year. Yeah. So that's what I think we have to demand more is proper terms, proper filled out contracts, and be cognizant of that. Because again, I want to go to, the chat's being quiet, but that's okay. When people are looking at this later on, they can chime in. Let's talk about ramifications on defaulting, because I think that's something that I'm not necessarily seeing more on my end, but it's something that I'm talking to my clients about from the seller's perspective of, we're asking a lot and this marketplace is demanding a lot of buyers. But we just kind of touched on it, which is that's just a piece of paper. So you can have that appraisal waiver that says, hey, I'm willing to bring $200,000 to the table. But when it all comes down to it, and Adrian says, there's no way that you guys can do this, and no, your neighbor can't give you $100,000 under the table. That doesn't work that way. What happens and what can happen?
Well, that story has not really changed much in 40 or 50 years. Maybe litigation was a little cheaper in 1971 than 2021, but by and large, a contract that falls apart, yes, you can run to an attorney. Yes, you can hire an attorney. You can be right as rain. You can be right all day long. But when that attorney says, well, you have $3,500 earnest money or $5,000, and it's going to take me $10,000 to $15,000 at a minimum to dislodge it, you're left with what? And you get a lot of frustration, and you get a lot of, what good are the contracts? I hear this sort of thing. They're not. But that is nothing new. Title companies, which are holding the money between a seller and buyer, have not been judges or juries since they started holding money. An escrow holder is not permitted to say, buyer wrong, seller right, you get the money, here's the money. They're just not allowed to do that there. So
let me ask you that. I'm going to go off script a little bit. I know we talked about some points because this is a pain point for me, understandably. And when I'm talking to my sellers, even before we get offers, hey, this is what's going to happen. And here are the expectations I'm setting. Understand that makes somebody financially more invested, but I don't want you to ever look at that number and see it as something that you are going to receive no matter what, even if the buyer defaults outside of any of their feasibility periods. And often what I get challenged with, which Ashley, that is a broken system. Why is it even there? And we have these feasibility timelines and these outs in the contracts, then who can make that determination? And Charles, you being an attorney who also represents title companies, I understand that they are holding the money. They are not going to sit there. It would be a bad business decision, which is what I've always told. They're not going to do that. But being on the broker lawyer committee, what have the discussions been around this? Is there any way to combat that?
Not in the category of default. Now, let me contrast. Title companies are, I think, acting a little better these days than they did 30 or 40 years ago. For example, I think, hopefully I'm speaking generically for all title companies, but most of them in the context of an option termination. If you terminate during the option period, and that's fairly black and white and mechanical, that's not a default question. Buyer gets their money back. And if you can document that properly, I think most title companies are not going to ask the seller's permission. There are other instances in our contracts, for example, a backup contract, where you stick a backup addendum on a contract and you're basically saying to the seller, I'm your insurance policy. So if buyer number one doesn't close, then I step up into first position and I become the new buyer. And you may remember on the backup addendum, there's language that says, oh, by the way, if the first contract doesn't terminate by this deadline, by this date, I call it the buyer got a no buy date. But if it doesn't terminate by this date, then my backup terminates automatically. Well, that's not a default situation. That's a black and white factual determination.
Sure.
You can call the title company and say, did the first one terminate or not? No, it didn't. Well, that date is here. This contract is terminated, so the backup buyer should get their earnest money back. So there are instances in which a title company should not and often does not ask a seller for permission to get the buyer's earnest money back. But in the case of default, that's the one area that will always require, if there is a dispute between a seller and buyer as to whether there was a default. And by the way, buyers are never wrong. They never are in default. They never did anything wrong. But that always has to be a court of law. And as frustrating as that is, people that rant and rave about that's not fair, contracts don't work, the answer is even simpler. You might as well say, what good is a contract if someone signs it and then doesn't obey it? And that's nothing new. People have been breaching contracts for hundreds of years, but when someone breaches a contract, the only remedy we have is to go to a court. We're not allowed to beat them up or get Uncle Vinny to drag the money out of them. It just doesn't work that way. We don't throw people in jail for debt anymore. So it's the court of law. I
don't know, Charles. My maiden name is Ferrantino, so I might lean more towards.
You might have some relatives that could do that, but
most
people don't.
Yes, most people don't. But Adrian, that brings up another point, because knowing that and knowing what's happening right now, and we are seeing some more aggressive terms, that's something to take into consideration for buyers that end up having to back out, whether it's, gosh, we thought this was going to at least come in this target range. I've seen some incredulous appraisals that have happened. And unfortunately, unless there was a major misgiving in there, appraisers aren't always quick to make adjustments. That's not painting a broad brush that they're bad as a whole or anything like that. But we are seeing some that have been quite surprising when you're drilling down and looking at those things. And when you've got buyers that are putting $5,000 to $10,000 of their money up and then they can't see it. I mean, have you seen anything like that where it's stopped a buyer from moving forward in the purchasing process at all?
No, I had a contract canceled that an appraisal came in low, but they did not do an appraisal waiver. So they did that. I've had a lot of buyers put down $1,000 option fee.
Yeah.
And a smaller earnest money to get their deals, and they've lost their option money.
Get that back ever. Yeah.
But it was an enticing. At least they got the contract and moved forward.
Well, and that's something I don't want to take away from earnest money, but as a listing agent, I do want to see that option period, that option fee for that option period a little healthier. And I think that's something that we can do. But since
I have an idea. I want to throw out an idea.
Sure.
Because I recommend this to agents, and the practice is not well known enough. So let's promote it here. Let's say that you are you are aware that it's hard to get the earnest money. It's being held by the title company. Let's say you're getting to the closing date and you're the listing agent and seller, and the buyer says, I'm going to need 7 more days. I'm going to need an extension of the closing date. And most sellers will give maybe one extra pass, but you get the situation where a buyer comes to you again and again, and that we need this, we need that, and maybe you do believe them that it's not their fault. They're waiting on this tax return from the lender. At some point, a seller says, I want more money. I want more earnest money. Mm-hmm. Now, my suggestion is, rather than asking a buyer to dump more cash into a third-party title company where the seller can't get it anyway, that you couch your amendment like this. You do an amendment that extends the closing date, and in special provisions, and you want to call your favorite attorney for this wording, and I'm available, or, basically this says, upon execution of this amendment, capital T title, capital C company, it's a defined term, shall release and disperse all earnest money to seller, comma, which sum shall be non-refundable to buyer under all circumstances, but which shall be credited to the sales price at closing. That solves a lot of things. It's a true put your money where your mouth is clause, where 1, the buyer doesn't have to come up with any more money. It's right there at the title company. 2, if the buyer follows their word, if they honor their word, they don't lose a penny of it. Yep. And 3, if they don't, it's already in seller's hands. They don't have to sue anybody to get it. They don't have to do anything. So that is a suggestion for folks out there that need extensions of the closing date and they want to be paid for them. Consider dispersing the earnest money from the title company into the seller's hands and making it non-refundable, rather than throwing more wood on the fire, throw more money in escrow where you can't get it.
Well, and that's great. I've done that one time this year, and we actually did it from jump, because my clients, even though I went round robin with them 72 ways from Sunday, they didn't want to be as aggressive, and it was more in that luxury price point.
Yeah, but that is an aggressive tactic. I agree. Yes.
Yeah, but it was one they were willing to do on their end, and that's what they did. But Charles is right. That's something that, please, for whoever's watching and listening out there, do not write your own language. No. So whatever title partner that you use, whether it's Republic Title, and Charles will be the one that you're speaking with.
Attorney. There's plenty of attorneys out there that'll help you.
Absolutely. And figure out what that language looks like so you're not running rogue. So for next thing that we're seeing, and I think another one that's just been a huge trend, and we talked about it, Charles, home builders and their contracts. Yeah. It's been fun. Adrienne's already rolling her eyes at this point. So it's hard. I mean, even in a normal, more normal marketplace, builders contracts lean more towards protecting the builder. They always have.
That's an understatement. Builders contracts are drawn by builders attorneys to totally favor the buyer. The builder. They favor the seller. They don't favor the buyer at all. And you'd be stunned at some of the clauses in these things. And we talked about it earlier. I'm just going to give you the acronym PITA, the PITA clause. But most builders contracts have a clause in them that says,
pain in the ass. I'm going to say it. Pain in the ass.
Pain in the ass. If I'm sick of you, if I want to, I can, as the builder, terminate this contract, give you all your money back, plus some liquidated damages of $500. And you don't have any right whatsoever to buy this house. You don't have specific performance. You can't sue me. Sure. I can kick you off. Now, the original, I think, genesis of that clause was for super picky home buyers. And they're just dragging the builder through the weeds, going, look, I don't need to fix the light panel in order to get paid on the deal. But what has happened is that prices for materials, prices for labor are accelerating monthly, if not weekly. And when you take 9 months to build a home, when you price it at a certain thing, at the end of 9 months, the builder's profit is not only gone, but the builder is underwater. Are repricing buyers out of their homes. You may have seen stories about this on TV. It's shocking.
Yeah.
When you get a builder that comes to you and says, we need to have a talk. What is it? You can't buy this home for $650 or $350 or $200. We're going to have to reprice it. You wonder, how can they do that? It's the PITA clause. They have the right to kick you off if you don't agree to a new price. So it's a huge problem, and it hurts buyers. You can also understand it from the builder's point of view because they are losing money on the accelerating prices of labor and materials. I don't know what we do except keep your contracts as short as possible. You know, a single family home from a giant tract builder or a national home builder like Pulte or Toll Brothers should generally be able to be done, I'm going to guess, in 6 to 9 months.
Not even close, Charles. And that's the unfortunate part. I've got a pre-drywall meeting tomorrow for a contract that we signed off on in February.
Of last year or this year?
This year, pre-drywall.
Well,
I have another one that I signed off on late December, early January, and they will be in March. And neither one are custom homes. And that is the unfortunate part. Now, I feel for the builders because they don't want to drag it out that far. And think about the pricing, increase in inflation that we've all experienced just on normal goods going to the store. So I do get it at some point, but it's also a marketing cost because I don't know about you guys, but I know that all three of us were around when, the early 2000s hit, and a lot of builders misbehaved them as well, and then weren't in business when things recalibrated again. And so I do know there are a lot of good home builders out there that have said, we're not going to put anything in writing, but you have our word. We're going to try to mitigate as much of this as possible. And just know if something happens, we will try to have a conversation with you as early as possible. But And I can appreciate that. Just having the dialogue and conversation. There are some that have just said, our costs have increased. We want to keep our margin of profit still at this percentage. So we don't care about what the optics are, in the public. We're going to charge it back to the buyer. Now, Adrian, have you had any instances where your buyers have been affected by this?
I haven't had any with the prices going up raw. I have had one, I take that back, that just recently closed, but their contract read in it that if there was an increase in the cost of the supplies between the time they went under contract and completion, that they agreed to pay that additional cost.
Yeah.
Charles, most of the contracts that we're seeing on the builder side either have that language or have an act of God clause.
Yes.
And the act of God clause basically is the broadest brush you can stroke you can paint as far as, and that is, these are things that we just could not foresee occurring. And I think, that some builders have just gotten wise over, we've had brick shortage and we've had other things over time, but this has just been such a compounding effect as far as that goes. And there were a lot of agents when the market started going nuts said, I'm only selling new construction. I'm only selling new construction because I don't have to compete with 40 other buyers. And at least I get my buyers locked in. And of course, all the private Facebook groups that everybody thinks are so private and people are posting on there. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. Do you not think that these contracts that are completely unilateral, and go towards the builder, that you are safe in these situations? And again, it goes back to the education piece where most people that I work with have building a home and have worked with another agent before said they never saw their agent again. They went and showed them a model home. They signed on a contract and then it was a divorce from that standpoint. So why do I need to use an agent? Well, this is exactly why. And it's me having those conversations and with both builders, with both sales managers, and wanting to look them in the eye and have those conversations of shoot me straight, because I will be your best friend and I will be your working advocate through all of this. But you need to tell me now what's been coming down from corporate and how are you guys handling these things? Now, can I get them if they're sitting there and just trying to sell me something? But no, I should be able to have a gut feeling at some point to say, we're walking away. I don't like what's
it might require several of those meetings. If in fact it's taking 14 months, 16 months, that's definitely something that a buyer or a buyer's agent, they don't want to sit and look at their nails and then in 14 months go, where are we? And suddenly the prices increase and they weren't, they're caught off guard. So you should be having this, where are we at 6 months? Where are we meeting at 6 months and at 9 months and at 10 months?
Yep.
And you ride them. Because communication, that's the key to any transaction. You tend to give people a break, and deals stay together when people communicate and are transparent with each other. When people are quiet or shifty or silent about their motives, that's where distrust builds in and deals break apart. That's just what happens.
Well, and that's it right there, which is why you need to have a constant advocate on your side every step, because a buyer is not going to know when to apply that pressure point and when to have those conversations. And it's really important. Now, at the same time, I can put things into perspective, because we did have to, on one of these new construction homes, we did have to sign a piece of paper. They basically said, we're giving you a one-time out. This was a couple of months ago, because we still don't know when we're going to get the windows. It literally took 8 months to get windows, which means you can't even start the interior until you get the dadgum windows. And that's been the biggest pain point. They said, we're going to give you a one-time out because we can't give you a time frame, and we'll refund your money and just walk away. Now, the other part was, we can't guarantee you that there's not going to be increase in cost or anything else, but we're going to basically try to mitigate that. And my clients came to me and said, of course, one of them's like, I've talked to an attorney friend and they don't want me to sign it, and it's awful, and it's all these other things. And I just said, okay, but that's great. If I try to find this same house for you right now in the resale market, you're paying $80,000 to $100,000 more than what you're under contract for. So even if they come back and increase the sales price marginally, $20,000, something else, you guys are still coming ahead, and we've got to put things in contextually. And we had those conversations for about an hour of here's what's left. And this is a lifestyle change, because you don't want 2 kids and 1,300 square feet in a historical bungalow. So you guys got to move somewhere, and so for them, it was that conversation, but that's also a conversation with their lender.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I've had several contracts, new construction that have gone under, and then 9 months later, when I get my appraisals back, my finals, they're worth way more than what they went under contract for. And so they've already got a lot of that equity, but also the builders, huge pressure, emails constantly and calling. If you don't close on time, we're canceling the contract. If you're not ready to close, we're canceling the contract. We will not give you an extension. I mean, it's just like, and then like a week before, they're like, we're not ready to close because we don't have appliances and we don't have the flooring, or but they are looking for a reason to cancel the contracts all day long.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had 2 that have closed in the past few months and appraised for $100,000 more than what they were under contract for. So this shouldn't scare people from doing new construction at this point, even though there is a lot of volatility in the process when it's from scratch. If it's an inventory or spec home that's already been underway and they can control some of those things, that's also something that people need to take into consideration. If your buyer does not have that bandwidth to go through that stress, then maybe try to look for inventory product. And there is some out there that is already on its way and kind of surpassing some of these stages that we're seeing a lot of delays on, because it's not a lot of the interior components. It's the brick, it's the windows. Those are the 2 main things that we're seeing.
Appliances are sitting on a ship outside of China, and they're not going to be here for 9 months. I've seen builders tell their customers, I'll let you move in and we'll close, and I will stick some used appliances so you can wash your dishes, and I will commit in writing to deliver the Bosch or the Miele dishwasher as soon as it arrives, but it's going to be April, next year.
But that's thinking out of the box, at least, and going there. So I think appliances are probably, you're absolutely right, the interior wise, but it's getting to that point. So again, builders have gotten smart. They're not even putting their spec or inventory product on there until they get to a certain threshold. And there were a lot of builders that stopped taking custom contracts and basically building them from scratch and saying, no, we're going to control the process because this is one way we can protect.
When we're 80% done, then we'll put it on the market. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is absolutely smart. So, well, it's good to know that Adrian, you haven't had as much volatility on that side, but it's something that we really need to continue to bring light to, because I don't see that this is going to change, unfortunately, anytime soon. But the last thing that people need to be cognizant of when you are talking about it's taking 14 and upwards of 16 months to complete it's a little bit more than a track home, but it's still, that's where we are. It's a production product. Rates. I mean, that's obviously something that's huge. So Adrian, what have you seen and where are you thinking? Obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but what's a disclaimer and some things that we can talk about here on where rates have been going?
Well, they've been increasing. I mean, and so it's just having that conversation with them, making sure that they can qualify at a rate a point higher than where it is now, because if they go up, you don't want them to not qualify because of that. And so they've just been steadily increasing. And when you're in that new construction with the clients, we have to continuously update like income and different stuff just to make sure they're not throwing themselves out of the market immediately, and staying in contact with them. Because, during that time span, everybody wants to go shopping and buy everything and get a new car and change jobs. And so it's a challenge just staying in communication with the clients regarding all of that,
Well, and again, back to buyer's agents, that's something that everybody needs to be cognizant of is, you see no interest deals at Nebraska Furniture Mart, and I'd love to be able to get my sofa, and I'd love to be able to do this. And I always redirect and say, hey, just check back with your lender and make sure your DTI and everything else looks good. We don't, if you were at a threshold where your credit score was questionable, we don't need to see that. And so it's always, again, deferring back to the professional. So you got an issue with a contract and you need some provisions written or something else, you go to Charles, you go to somebody like Charles to make sure that's written appropriately. If there's anything that has to do with financing, you need to always redirect your buyers back to the lender. This is something where, keep ourselves out of hot water. We don't know everything, and we don't know what the trajectory is going to be. And it still might be in the buyer's best interest to go under contract and wait those 14 months. But understand, it's also setting an expectation of, here's where we are as far as pre-qualifying you and what your payment's going to be today. But setting that expectation of just understand this is increasing. Rates are going up, and you need to understand that going forward. And Adrian, that's why you're such a great resource, because not going to say that you work with uneducated buyer's agents, but you might get somebody who ends up knowing an agent and you don't have a relationship with them. And you being, I know you are that advocate for them to have that conversation. So people, if there's any consumers that are watching right now, that's why it's just so important to work with trusted professionals and to make sure that you're in good hands. So the last thing we kind of wanted to talk about was, things that we're seeing on title commitments. And Charles, I kind of asked you to even just get Adrienne again, rolled her eyes. I love it. I love the expressiveness, but there are so many agents that don't even understand what a title commitment is. And so can you give us a real high level surface overview?
Sure. So a title commitment is a preview of a title insurance policy is what it is. And in the same way that it's just, remember that title insurance is insurance. So in the very same way that you can call your insurance broker for your car or your house and say, hey, I'm buying a car today. I'm buying a house today. I need a binder, to cover that house because I'll be closing today. And God forbid there's a fire between, the time we close and the time we move in. I want coverage to be effective at midnight tomorrow. They can do that. They can bind the coverage. They wait on the premium to arrive. The same concept works in title insurance. And so the word commitment is not that different than the word binder. It's the title company or the insurer's commitment to insure the title to that house, provided you pay the policy. A title commitment is a form that doesn't vary in the state of Texas. It's created by the Texas Department of Insurance. It has four schedules. There we go. Schedule A, Schedule B, Schedule C, Schedule D. The best way to describe a title commitment is the following. The title company says, I promise to insure the person listed on Schedule A in the amount listed on Schedule A, which is the purchase price, the property described in Schedule A, with the exceptions to my coverage in Schedule B, provided that the items listed in Schedule C are satisfied, mortgages and things like that, and I'm paid the premium listed in Schedule D. That's really what a title commitment is. And of those things, you want to look to see that all the stuff on Schedule A is correct, or is the buyer correct? Is the policy amount correct? Do we have the right property? And Schedule B are exceptions that show easements and things like that. It's Schedule C, the requirements that agents ought to take a look at. I don't expect agents to be title commitment review experts, but the most common thing you see on Schedule C is a seller's mortgage. What do you mean take care of a seller's mortgage? That means the title company is going to have to get a payoff and pay it off at closing. But other things that you see on Schedule C that will pop up are judgments. Sellers get sued, they get a judgment taken against them, they appear on Schedule C. How does a seller satisfy a judgment? Well, they're going to have to get that released. The title company's listing it. And so while it is the truth and the case that most title companies take care of you and they take it upon themselves to deal with these issues, it shouldn't be something that the buyer and the agent and the seller and the listing agent are blind to. You should be aware of these processes. The relationship should be that of a cooperative team where you're working with the title company. You're checking in with them. Are we good? Anything you see? Oh, yeah, we got 5 judgments. So apparently the seller's been sued over and over, and it's going to be a big one. Oh, my gosh, I better get my seller talking to you. And you promote that communication, because if you just have your blinders on and all you're focused in on is inspections and the quality of the house, and the title companies, that title work is a piece I don't need to worry about, you can get surprised, especially as a listing agent, when the title company says 2 days before closing, we've been working on these judgments, you haven't called or talked to us, and we're not going to be ready to close. Surprise, So it is the kind of thing you want to be aware of and pay attention to.
Adrian, anything to note on that has thrown you guys off? Have you had any issues with that the past little bit?
Oh, periodically we do. And I'll tell you what it is he hit it on the nail. The agents don't look at it. Mm-hmm. So we get this and it's got like HOA lien for something that might have been paid off 5 years ago, really, but there was no release filed. Or city coming out and doing mowing or fines, and they're sitting on there. I had one that probably had 20 from the city, literally. And so it's, I end up picking up the phone and calling both agents and going, hey, we've got an issue here. And hey, did you see the title commitment? Did you look at it? Oh, no, what is it? And I'm like, well, the seller's got this, or sometimes it's the name, and it's just verifying that it doesn't belong to that person, and that's easy. But a lot of times it's like, and they're like, so then they go to the seller, and it's like, they think they're going to net 60 grand, and they're going to net 20 because they have all these judgments and liens. So it comes up often. Yeah.
Well, and that also goes into, so I know that's not a sexy topic for most people is title commitments, but it's also the difference in between getting to the closing table, because often, you might only have 2.5 weeks to cure those issues or those encumbrances that are sitting there on that. And so again, always coming from the liability piece, you're not a title examiner. Yes, I don't know how to read everything, but I do know how to sit there and read documentation and say, hey, something doesn't look right. And to be able to pick up the phone as an agent, because it is both sent to the buyer's agent and the listing agent. And so I think that's something for listing agents to be more cognizant of, because I will tell you most of the time, listing agents will not open that PDF. Oh, it doesn't pertain to us. That's for the buyer.
Yeah, that's for the title company to deal with. Let's say on Schedule C, let's say that the seller is a divorced male, divorced man, ex-husband, and he got the property in a divorce. Only the divorce attorney didn't do their job, and they didn't actually do a deed from the ex-spouse, the ex-wife.
No, a family law attorney didn't do their job in real estate law.
And so on the title company's Schedule C requirements, it says obtain a deed from the ex-wife. If nobody, the title company has limited, they can only do so much. And so the person that is most easily able to start that communication and bridge that gap is going to be your seller. Title company, they call it, first of all, they got to find that person, and that starts with the seller. So that's a perfect example of, maybe just peek at the title work, and if you see something weird, what is this requirement about deed out of my ex-wife? Call them, talk to them, and then we can develop a strategy. Here's what we need to do, and we tackle it.
So just a point of explanation for agents out there. Again, these are some things that should be red flags when you're sitting there and having your initial listing appointments. If it is a divorce situation, if you look on the tax rolls and the ex-wife's name's still there, but they're divorced, all of these other things, that's a great opportunity to open title before you even go on the market. If there's anything that is in question, and I do this on almost every divorce, every, trust situation, anything that I feel like, okay, we just got to make sure that probate. It's not that probate. And it's not to say that anybody did anything intentionally incorrectly, but there are so many different steps that unfortunately are not followed through with. And so that's where and you'll see it in private remarks. Most of the time, it's just a passive aggressive way for somebody to not change the title company in the contract. Already open title, but
it serves a good purpose. It serves a great purpose.
It does serve a great purpose to not have any of those surprises. And so we've got a few minutes left. And so the last surprises that I kind of want to talk about that I think buyers have had to kind of deal with is the mandatory, I'm going to shorten it to the mandatory HOA addendum, which is not what it's called, but it's for homeowners associations for houses or properties that are in there. And again, you being from the broker lawyer committee, Charles, can you give a little context as to what happened? Why did they do this?
Why did they do this? It's important to remember what the mandatory HOA addendum used to say until, I don't know, November of 2020 or maybe more recently. It used to say that if the HOA fee is a reserve or a deposit, then that's logically something that a buyer should pay for. If the HOA says, well, at closing we need to collect 4 months of dues or 6 months of dues, then that comes from the buyer. The problem that was happening, the fights that occurred at the title company level would be the HOA would produce a bill and they'd have all these charges and they would have funny names and you couldn't tell, you'd look at it in the sun. Well, is that a deposit or a reserve or is that another type of charge? And what is that? And buyers and sellers would get into fights over whether is that a reserve that a buyer has to pay for or is that some other charge that maybe the seller has to pay for up to a buyer cap. And the broker lawyer committee said, look, why don't we just put every charge of the HOA that results from the transfer of the property into one bucket, and we will let the parties freely negotiate who's going to pay for what. The problem with that is that the language was retained in there from a different era. I call it the buyer cap. It basically says, everything the HOA charges, except for the resale certificate, buyer shall pay not more than X dollars, and seller shall pay the remainder. So now, even those reserves and those deposits and those working capital contributions for new condos and things like that are in the bucket. And if you've written $250 in that blank as a buyer cap, that causes the unintended effect of seller paying for all these buyer reserves. The problem is that we are in a prolonged seller's market where sellers will not tolerate paying these charges that they should not have to pay. And so really, one of the responses or the thoughts is until this language gets changed, and by the way, broker lawyer committee is considering comments, and you may see some alterations of this language. But until it gets changed, you have to deal with it. You have to be aware of this problem. You have to be aware of the unintended consequences, and maybe you change the buyer cap to a seller cap, where you get an attorney to help you rewrite it, and you simply change the polarity of that clause. Seller shall pay not more than X dollars of these charges, and buyer shall pay the remainder. That's one way to handle it until it gets fixed. But being aware of this problem created by the new language is the first step, being aware of this issue.
Well, and I think, again, the idea behind it was correct, which was having some transparency for buyers, especially obviously from Adrian's perspective, for listing agents to provide some transparency. If there is an initial $1,500, capital contribution or something else like that, that could be the difference maker in somebody being able to actually bring the necessary cash needed to close. And I know that was the rationale behind it, but again, it goes to the due diligence. If you've got a property, and more so we see it in condos and townhomes and things like that, where we see a little bit more volatility in that. But I remember the minute this came out, I had a property that was in a gated community that had a $1,500 initial, capital contribution and some other things. And that was the part of the conversation I had with my client. Okay, let's talk about the HOA. And so we instructed people in private remarks, agents, to put at a minimum the $2,000 in that blank.
Make the cap really high. Yeah.
Make the cap high, but make it reasonable, and spell out why that is, because there is an initial capital working contribution, something else like that. So the flip of it is those are all the things that we need to do as agents to make sure that we're doing our due diligence up front, because again, you're going to have issues where Charles has to step in as legal counsel when things go to a head. And then Adrian, people, I'm not saying they're on a shoestring budget, but gosh, let's talk about inflation. Things are more and more expensive nowadays, and people's wages are not catching up with that. So, actually somebody being pre-qualified for homes is at a thinner margin than we've seen. And so, and so those are those conversations that we need to be having. I do need to apologize because apparently there've been comments and I can't see them today. So I've been texting our lovely Wizard of Oz behind the scenes saying, can you at least make me feel better and make a comment about our class schedule so we can continue to talk about these things? So apparently people have been commenting. We are not losers, guys. We have been engaging, and I will get a couple of the comments in the host chat, so I'll be able to allude to those here in about 1 minute. But we've got 2 minutes left. So Adrian, we talked about a lot of things, and yes, it's been more on the legality side, but give us a couple of things to think about as agents that are representing buyers in this marketplace. What can we do to get them better prepared and you teed up for success?
Well, probably I'm talking about the HOAs, if as a listing agent and a buyer's agent, finding out what that HOA dues are, things like that, because a lot of times we get contracts that has that $250 max filled out. That's all we get. We don't get anything else. How much monthly is nothing. So we have to do a lot of research on it. Filling out those contracts fully, that is really nice, because I get contracts with blanks, and I get some that say $5,000 earnest money to Republic Title. And then I'm calling which office? Things like that, telling the buyers, don't go shopping, don't buy anything, just things like that. Just communication between all of us. It's really, really important.
So the normal stuff, which unfortunately, and I know you're doing a real good job. Is that as grandma right now with the?
Yes.
At first I was like, is that dog? And then I heard her voice. You're doing a great job. Your grandma's almost done. But you know what that comes down to is it's not that these are the basics. It's the fact that, again, 50% of our realtor population in the state of Texas, and I don't think we're immune just in Texas, but we have to be cognizant of that, have been licensed for 5 years or less. And so, as whether it's cooperative agents, as referral partners, industry partners, we all have to be cognizant that not everybody's been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years.
Right.
Charles, give us your sign off on whether it's attorney preferential sign off, broker, lawyer, whatever. Tell us how to behave. I don't care. You get to pick.
Guys, my final word is there are a lot of really smart, experienced people out there in the mortgage field, in the survey field, in the broker field, in the title field, in the attorney field. Use those tools to learn from, make them your mentors, master these contracts. They are the lifeblood of what you do. So learn, absorb, be a student, and you will find that it is constantly interesting, constantly challenging, and there's always more to learn. So I'm a student myself. Keep learning, keep asking, keep seeking those mentors and asking questions.
I will tell you, doing things like this alone, I learned so much from our guests, and you guys have been absolutely phenomenal. You're two highly respected individuals in your own lanes. And I now feel so much better that there have been comments, because I was sitting here going, we are not that dry. Okay, so now I see something. Okay, hold on. I know we're going over our time. Give me like 1 minute. Let's see. I was told we went through most of them. Okay, you know what? Johnny Moad, because he's a great realtor advocate. We do so much with him, and he's super knowledgeable. He said, know the builder, know the process, know their history, know their reputation. Don't be afraid to ask the builders how their timetables have shifted during the variables over the past 2 years and how they've managed it with their portfolios, et cetera. So that's what's so important is having those conversations and knowing the questions to ask. And Pam Nelms, she said, I will always go to every meeting with the builder and the buyer. And that is crucial. As agents, we don't need to extricate ourselves from that process. I think that's when our buyers lose out and we lose our value proposition as advocates for the consumer. And then, of course, Francie said, thank you so much to Adrienne Kirby and Charles Kramer. And of course, for me, thank you for our advice and our time. And this is Christmas time. And so you guys taking this time away from your family to continue to further educate us and do this is just huge. So we are, but Sherry Fearbacher, Charles, I'm going to highlight this because that's my mother. And I love her. And she put me in my place before Real Talk. But she is outgoing professional development chair, and she's going into forms and contracts. So you'll probably be talking very soon.
I'm here.
She said, thank you so much. And she said, have so many contract things to discuss with Charles. Maybe we'll run into each other soon. Charles, be happy and beware. I'm going to give you both of those things at the same time. Right. So with that, I'm going to say happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Have a wonderful time with families out there. This is kind of the only time of the year where everybody just quiets down just a little bit. So enjoy it. And, we will drop your contact information in the chat as well. And we appreciate you both. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll see you very soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Ashley. Thank you.